Hello there everyone, welcome back to another one of my in-depth guides. Today we are going to be doing an in-depth guide to Zoro in the One Piece card game. If you are watching this on YouTube, I would like you to know that my patrons have had access to this guide for quite some time. I'm not sure when you're seeing this, but I imagine OP3 is quite near by the time I'm putting this up on YouTube. So if you're interested in getting access to in-depth guides and meta-analyses during the tournament seasons when they are going to be most useful, please do check out my Patreon where you can get access to competitively focused TCG content. I think it's quite a reasonable price, and to all my patrons who are watching this right now, thank you so much for your support. It really does mean a lot. Let's get started. So, Zoro. Why would you want to play Zoro? I mean, you know, we're taking in isolation the fact that he's objectively the coolest Straw Hat. If we're removing the fact he's just a very cool character with a very cool character design, why are we actually playing this deck, right? Well, there's a few reasons you might be interested in playing Zoro. One, he's really easy to pilot. I think this is a pretty uncontroversial take. Zoro is, and aggro in general, is one of the easier things to play. It's fairly easy to turn cards sideways and say, I attack face. Obviously, that's not, you know, all you want to be doing, but it would not necessarily be overly reductive to say that's what Zoro does. Additionally, the deck is very consistent. Because you are red, you have access to the highest quality searches in the game, and with OP02, we got another searcher who is absolutely cracked for this deck, and when you factor in the sheer level of like search you have in this deck, then the consistency suddenly ends up going through the roof. The games are going to be quick. Your Zoro games are very unlikely to last more than 15 minutes, which means you're always going to have a lunch break, which is nice. This was somewhat of a piss-takey point, but it does kind of bear mentioning that, like, sometimes if you're playing one of these longer decks, you just don't really get a break. You know, while I'm saying a lunch break here, but like even mentally taxing decks mean that you're sort of sitting there, and every single round your capabilities are getting, you know, lower and lower, or certainly you're eating into, you know, how much more you can realistically play at a high level. Certainly I know when I was playing Kid during the first OP01 tournament, by the end of that final round, I knew there was no more gas left in the tank. Like, if any more matches and I would have been making horrendous misplay after horrendous misplay, I was done. So it is worth saying that a deck like Zoro, which is relatively simple, relatively straightforward, and the games are relatively quick, you are probably going to be operating, you know, firing on all cylinders for the entire day, whatever that means when you're playing Zoro. Anyway, and of course, the most important thing is it's got a pretty strong matchup spread. We'll go through the matchup spread as usual in the latter part of this guide, but in general, Zoro has pretty good matchups, and even when it doesn't, like the matchup is disadvantageous, I mean, ultimately, like, it's Zoro. You can just get lucky and completely blow them out. This is why Zoro is one of the scariest decks to play against in a tournament. Even if you're very confident in the matchup, ultimately sometimes Zoro is just going to blow you out, and, you know, you can't do anything about it. So this is very much a deck where if, you know, the power of God and anime are on your side, you will just win the entire event. But of course, you don't always want to leave it up to that alone, so that's why you're watching this. So let's talk through the strengths a little more. As I said, it's very easy to pilot. This is a deck where you don't need to sit there and, you know, practice lines of play. You don't have to do huge amounts of testing. I would say if you have good fundamentals in the One Piece card game, which if you've been playing since OP01, especially if you've been playing green or something like that, you absolutely should, then you kind of don't really have anything to worry about. You can just pick up this deck, play it a little bit, and you should be in a pretty good position. As long as you have these fundamentals down of knowing, you know, how to do the maths correctly, when should you be attacking, when should you be focusing on board, you know, all the usual stuff, which I certainly do plan on making a more in-depth guide on at a later date. Zoro is pretty pick up and play. As I said, the matchups are very quick and simple to learn. Fundamentally, by the very nature of Zoro as this very aggressive, very early game deck, there's not that many turns in the game. And a lot of those turns tend to look quite similar, and because there's not that many turns in the game, usually there's not a huge amount of variance in what you're going to be doing. Usually it just comes down to knowing, like, which particular matchups you absolutely have to search a particular answer for. Not that many. and otherwise your usual game plan is kind of going to do the job. As I say, it's one of the most consistent decks in the game, arguably the most consistent. I think it's up there with Law, but of course, Zoro being a 5-life leader means you always get that extra card. You can always just take that extra damage and not feel bad about it. Something that I think is a fairly underrated consideration is because you are playing an aggro deck, your opponent might just get very flustered. When you are simply turning cards sideways and going, yep, swing, 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 your opponent may just look at their hand and be like, well, I can't defend these, and they might go down to 1 or they might go down to 0, and it might be entirely possible for them to reverse that game, right? Like, yeah, okay, cool, you've got them down to 0, but if you can't kill them, it doesn't really matter. But because they have found themselves going down to 0 so fast, and if they don't have a lot of tournament experience, or they don't have a lot of experience playing into Zoro, they don't know how often this happens, they might get flustered, they might be misplaced, and they might throw the game that they might otherwise have won. So it's always worth bearing in mind that something like Zoro is going to have that, psychological factor on the opponent. And of course, as I said before, it's a low brain power deck. You don't need to be doing complex plays. You don't need to be thinking a huge amount on a given turn. Usually the lines are pretty obvious once you've played the deck a couple times, with some exceptions, but by and large, most of your turns, you're going to know what you're doing. You're going to be able to figure it out. You're going to be able to figure out what the optimal solution, the optimal route to the solution is, the solution being lethal. And in a long tournament, when we're talking 7, 8, 9 rounds day one, this is absolutely an advantage. This is not me dunking on Zoro players. There's plenty of ways to dunk on Zoro players, but this is one of the things I would say is a Zoro player going into round 7 is probably going to be feeling a lot fresher than a Law player going into round 7. I'll put it that way. But of course, every deck has its weaknesses, and the weakness of Zoro, the biggest one, it's a very linear game plan. It's, play cheap cards, turn them sideways, which means because it's such a linear game plan, and because your deck power level is so high, everyone and their mum is going to be prepared for you. So, after those first few rounds, you better expect every one of your opponents to have extensive Zoro matchup experience, and you shouldn't be surprised if it turns out that they know exactly how to play around you. One other major consideration is, sort of as a consequence of this, at a critical mass of Kiliman players, you're just going to be having problems. You can beat Kiliman, but if you're playing Kiliman, 3 times in a day, you're going to lose at least one of those, more than likely. And, if you're trying to top an event, X1 is what you should be aiming for. And you don't really want to be just giving up one of those victories, one of those losses for no reason. Though, at the time of this recording, it's looking like everyone's hopping on Strawbeard, and that is honestly quite good for you. Of course, as an early game deck, whilst you are consistent, you are still more prone to bricking than other decks, just by nature of you have to see your stuff sooner, so that's always something that is worth bearing in mind. And sort of an external factor, the deck is kind of expensive. You need the 2 most expensive SRs in the game at 4 copies, and you need the most expensive promo in the game at 4 copies. So it, plus you need the red starter deck, which is the most expensive starter deck and is kind of out of print. So it actually all adds up to being a surprisingly expensive deck considering what it is. That being said, I still think it's less than $150, but for the One Piece card game, it's relatively expensive. So let's get on to the key cards. It's kind of difficult to choose them because generally Zoro decks have like several packages. So I'll expand on this more when we move into the actual deck list. But I figured I would just highlight these because they're your kind of really obvious power cards. So Sunny-kun and Makino are insanely powerful cards that the deck gets access to. Sunny-kun is a Straw Hat Crew type card, which means it's searchable off Nami. It's also a 1-cost red, which means it's searchable off Curly Dedan. Makino is a 2k counter, 1-cost red, which means it's searchable off Curly Dedan as well. The reason these cards are so powerful is because if you play a Sunny-kun the turn before, on the turn that you're playing, you put 1 Don onto Zoro to buff your whole board by 1k, and you play Makino and you use the effect, and Sunny-kun is now a 7k swing. That's ridiculous. And so it's that kind of combo that is, insanely powerful, that you do want to be aware of. Zoro, Rush Zoro is of course a very, very powerful card. That's, kind of obvious. And Edward Newgate, again, a very obviously powerful card. Ideally, the way the deck sort of curves is you spend the first 4 turns playing cards, turning them sideways, and then on turn 5, especially going first, you just slam down your Edward Newgate. You're not dying that turn, and on the next turn, if your opponent's played any chump blockers, they're kind of screwed, and you can usually close out a game from that point, especially if you have any board left over. That's generally how it works. So let's go ahead and take a look at this deck list. By no means is this like the ideal deck list, but I think this is a pretty damn solid foundation, and it's playing pretty much all of the major things you're going to be seeing. So if we start off with the sort of consistency cards, we play 4 copies of Nami and we play 4 copies of Curly Dadan. Nami is going to find all your Straw Hats, which means it finds Nico Robin, it finds Roronoa Zoro, it finds Sunny-kun, it finds Brook, it finds Monkey D. Luffy, and it finds Gum Gum Jet Pistol. These are all cards you are likely going to need in some capacity, so being able to find any of them is very, very, very good. Curly Dadan finds all your 1-cost reds, which means it finds your Makinos, your Otamas, your Gordons, and your Sunny-kuns. Sunny-kun is your ideal aggro card, essentially, especially in combination with Makino. Otama is a combo removal card, which we'll talk about more in a second. And Gordon is actually another combo removal card, which we are using in combination with some of the other ones. So let's talk about the removal tools now. And the big cards to focus on here are Otama, Gordon, Vista, Robin, and Gum Gum Jet Pistol. So what Otama and Gordon do is they reduce your opponent's power on board. Otama is an on-play 2k counter to reduce one of your opponent's characters by 2k, whereas Gordon is an activate main bot deck it to reduce one of your opponent's characters by 3k. Obviously, Gordon doesn't have a counter, so you generally just want to be slamming it onto the board as fast as possible. Both of these then synergize incredibly well with Robin and Vista, which have the same effect at different timings. Robin is on attack, KO one of your opponent's units with 3,000 power or less, and Vista is an on-play to KO one of your opponent's characters with 3,000 power or less. Gum Gum Jet Pistol is a event that KOs one of your opponent's characters with 6,000 power or less. So you can see your kind of upper end is Gordon Gum Gum Jet Pistol. That will deal with anything 9k or below, which is pretty much everything that isn't 10-cost Kaido, 9-cost Whitebeard, and 10-cost Kutan. That is pretty much the entire format that's dealing with at that point. Otama Jet Pistol deals with 8k or below. Again, that's basically everything. Otama Vista and Otama Robin deal with everything 5k or lower, which is a huge amount of stuff. Gordon Robin, Gordon Vista deals with 6k or lower. So, like, Gordon into anything removes basically everything relevant, and the major top end things can also be dealt with by Jet Pistol and either one of your removal tools. These are, frankly, ridiculously powerful removal tools. Your opponent's never going to be able to stick a blocker with them around, and they are insanely good. So you have your removal, you have your consistency, and finally we talk about the power cards. We sort of mentioned Robin is incredibly good at dealing with blockers on attack, and it's searchable as a Straw Hat. Rush Zoro is Rush Zoro. The card is very, very good. With 1 Don, it becomes a 7k with your leader effect. Edward Newgate is insane. It makes your leader 7k on your opponent's turn, as well as your turn, so you just get a free 7k swing as well, and it's going to be very, very difficult for your opponent to kill you whilst you are at 7k, especially if you just have any amount of counter in your hand. And of course, Monkey D. Luffy is sort of the little tech I see people not playing for some reason. Guys, this card's kind of silly. You play it for 5, you put 1 Don on your leader, it's going to be 7, and then you slap 2 Dons onto it, and it's 9, and it's can't be blocked. And blocking 9k is kind of difficult. So if your opponent ever goes down to 0, you gotta appreciate that they're just going to be in a very, very sticky situation. So that is the deck list. I do think this is basically everything relevant that you need to know. So let's now move on to the matchups. So let's start off with the mirror match. I will upfront say this one's kind of a shit show. It really is quite luck-based. So as you'll see, I said here, your mulligan targets are Nami, Dadan, and Newgate. Nami and Dadan are pretty much always going to be in the mulligan targets. You always want to be seeing these cards early game because they build you a board, they maintain your hand advantage, and they are going to let you search for the tools you need in that particular matchup. Edward Newgate is just a insane power card. The Zoro mirror can just come down to who sees more of these, because it can be rare that you actually get the opposing Zoro player down low enough where they, like, are going to just die. Like, usually when I've been playing the Zoro mirror, if I slam 2 Newgates in a row, I win. So it's worth saying, if you see that, like, yep, it's a little sticky during the early game, but once you make it to the turns you can play them, your opponent's going to be in a rough situation. Anyway, as I said, this is kind of 50-50. You want to be turning cards sideways and just praying you see 9-cost Whitebeard. If you see a Robin, you need to remove it ASAP on the opponent's side. And obviously, if you see a Robin, you're going to be a very, very happy chap. In general, it's only worth removing the 1-cost units because of their synergy with Makino, so they can become very big very quickly. But this will depend on your impression of the opponent's hand. You need to be gaining as much information from from how they're guarding, what attacks they're guarding, what cards you see them guard with, and really doing your best to infer what they have as a result. This matchup's pretty luck-based, though, and it's one of the big sort of detriments of playing Zoro. You are probably going to play Zoro mirror matches, and they are kind of a shit show. They're kind of a toss-up. There's not a huge amount you can do to win them consistently, outside of just hoping you see the same tools your opponent does, and then just outplaying them, hoping they don't have as much counter. You know, it is what it is. Okay, next up is Whitebeard. So this one's rough because there's two very distinct versions, right? There's three technically. There's dickless Whitebeard, there's Whitebeard with dick, and then there's Strawbeard. So what's been happening recently is everyone and their mum has been playing Strawbeard. Honestly, I don't think the deck is anywhere near as good as its meta representation like shows it to be. It's very much beatable. The problem is that it's a deck that a lot of people are just not mainboarding answers for or not adequately playing around into. So, like, for example, one of the biggest differences in playing into Strawbeard versus Dickbeard is that you want to be swinging 6k into Strawbeard as hard as you can because you want to be depleting their hand. Strawbeard doesn't have the same level of defense that Dickbeard does. Dickbeard's game plan is you build a board, you sit there until you hit, 1, and then you go, okay, cool, Moby Dick, and now I'm swinging 8, 9, 9, 9, 9, and I'm definitely surviving your crackback turn, and I'm getting a whole other turn of hitting huge numbers. And it's very difficult for any deck to deal with that. As a result, Dickbeard also doesn't really care if you swing in for 6k because it'll just happily take it. It'll be like, that's fine. You're not really accelerating my death at all because you're just accelerating me killing you. Whereas with Strawbeard, you don't have the same sort of wait and see mentality. Strawbeard very much is on more of a clock. It is not playing the same level of defense. A lot of the Strawbeard lists aren't playing the same quantities of blockers. And as a result, if you can keep pressuring, every single card you rip out of the Strawbeard player's hand is going to be very advantageous to you. So anyway, that sort of tangent aside, I would say you are much more likely to be going in against Strawbeard, but you can generally tell because they're going to be playing Straw Hat units on the board. Mulliganing here, again, it's going to be Nami and Dadan, your consistency tools. Newgate is nice. Also, you can potentially mulligan for 5-cost Luffy. I do see some people not playing it, so I didn't put it on here, but I feel like you should be playing it. I think you should be going second here, just for the extra card, just because it does force them to be taking that damage slightly faster. Again, you are a rush deck, so you do appreciate that, and it does slightly open up your turn 1 plays a little more, because you can play Nami or Dadan going first as a consistency tool. As I say, it does depend on the variant, but in general, do not go face until they're at 1 life or less. But again, if it's Strawbeard, that's not true. If it's Strawbeard, then you want to be going 6k, 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 and really pressuring them. So it really does depend. You want to be building a wide board that threatens game, and if they're rested units, you want to be attacking them as much as possible to control the board. That's the advice in general. Like, if you let Whitebeard build a board, it can be very, very scary, even regardless of whether it's Strawbeard or Whitebeard. But you do want to be pressuring their face as well. It's just in your interest to go face. If you're not sure, throw 6k swings into face because of the units they guard with, that should give you the information you need, and then you can make a determination, and that will change how you play. Like turn 1 and turn 2, you can kind of figure it out. If you keep playing wrong though throughout the rest of the game, you can find yourself in a pretty sticky situation. Next, we have got Kiliman. So this is pretty much your worst matchup. It's pretty disadvantageous. It's a rough one. You want to be mulliganing for Nami Dadan and Jet Pistol. You kind of want to see 2 Jet Pistols, honestly. Like, it's very, very scary. You want to be going second not because you necessarily want to go second, but because you do not want Kiliman to go second. Why is this? Because Kiliman going second is going to play an Okiku turn 1. You are not going to have the Don to deal with Okiku. You're literally not. You need 4 Don to deal with Okiku. There's really no way for you to deal with it otherwise. So your opponent's Okiku is going to stick, which means when they on curve go into a Yamato, rest one of your units, swing into it with the Okiku with a Don on it, kill it, rest another one of your units, and then swing into that with your leader. You've lost your board. Your opponent has 2 huge units. It's very unlikely you're going to be able to just deal with it. It's just horrible. So you want to do everything you can to avoid that situation, which means going second. yeah, it's basically impossible to win this matchup going first if your opponent sees what they need to. Green, now, the nice things here, green really doesn't have that much defense. So if you can go second, and you can keep applying pressure by turning your card sideways and saying attack face, obviously, if there's something like an Okiku, it is absolutely worth prioritizing the Okiku. Then they might just die. And you will see that green lethals happen at like lower attack values than you would necessarily be expecting. But it's also luck based, because if they just see a bunch of blockers, you kind of can't really do anything, especially if they're playing stuff like 7-cost Geared or blocker Law to like be, you know, swing with Okiku, bouncing the Okiku, replaying something else, and like there's a whole host of different things they can be doing that can make your life very, very difficult. If they see the resters in addition to the blockers, it's pretty much impossible to win, even if you do go second, because they will just clear your board. They will not go face. A good Kiliman player is not going to attack your face. He's not going to give you cards, and you're just going to be sitting there going, okay, well, this sucks. That being said, if you just slam Whitebeard after Whitebeard, that can just swing the game for you and let you win. But if they are able to control your board and establish an Odin, it's kind of wraps. So this is just the one matchup where you really have to pray that you dodge it a lot, and that you just see what you need to into the matchup, and they don't see what they need to. It's a real rough one. Next, we have got Ivankov. This one is, again, kind of 50-50. I think you want to be going second here, just because it gives you the extra Don to play your stuff on curve and also be using your leader effect, which means you're constantly swinging 6k. Eva does not have that many 2ks, so that is a really, really good thing you want to be doing. Again, you want to be mulliganing for your consistency tools plus your power cards, like Edward Newgate. Going second, it means that Ivankov playing an ideal curve has, you know, very little aggression. But what I mean by that is Ivankov will be going first. Their turn 1 play is usually a Perona or a Buggy. Turn 2 is going to be a Doflamingo blocker. Turn 3 is going to be a Crocodile 7k. Turn 4 is going to be the Eva Luffy combo. So they're not actually really attacking with anything other than leader until turn 5, usually. And 5 turns of just getting their shit kicked in, and not necessarily being able to really attack at high values and clear your units back is really, really rough. For that reason, it can be worth just not attacking for the first couple turns while you build a wide board. Maybe like turn 1 and turn 2, you don't necessarily attack with any units, but then turn 3, you've got 3 or 4 of them, and you just start turning cards sideways, and there is no chance in hell that the Ivankov player is going to be able to deal with your whole board, and that can be really, really rough. As I say, Ivankov is a deck that does relatively little in the first few turns as it sets up, so if you're able to build a wide board and apply pressure, you should win. Obviously, if they see the nuts in terms of 2k counters, it can be a very difficult match, but that is unlikely. It is a fairly luck-based deck, Ivankov is, so if you are just turning cards sideways and swinging 6 and 7k, it can be really, really tough for Ivankov to win. I said this is 50-50. I think it's more advantageous for Zoro. I was probably a little bit conservative there, but yeah, I would say Zoro should be winning this most of the time. Kaido, this is your freest matchup. You want to be mulliganing for your consistency tools and Zoro because it is a rush card. Also Luffy, but Zoro is better because you play it earlier. Just turn card sideways. Play around Hell Judgment by once that is looking like it's going to be online, swinging 8k, so you're always forcing extra cards out of their hand. And make sure to always use at least 1 Don before attacking. That can be in attaching it to something, however you want to be using it, just to prevent getting screwed over by a trigger. This really should be quite a free matchup. Even if Kaido sees like the nuts in blockers, like that's fine because it means it's not developing like an aggressive board. It really can't interact with your board very much. Like you are playing so many cheap dudes, and especially if you're playing ones like Nami and Dadan, which are refilling your hand, it's just really, really difficult for a Kaido player to do anything. I think this is very much in Zoro's favor. Smoker, again, another matchup which is pretty advantageous for Zoro. It is not as advantageous as the Zephyr matchup, which we'll talk about shortly, but it definitely is a matchup that Zoro does enjoy. Yes, Smoker will be swinging 7k pretty much all the time because you are playing 1k units. That is worth saying. But if you go second, the Smoker player is going to have a rough time. This is because the Smoker player is going to have less hand resources, and they're going to be playing off curve. Because usually the Smoker player's curve is odd, is even. Which means, because if they want to be dedicating a Don then to their leader effect, it's kind of like they're playing a whole, you know, a whole cycle behind you, right? Like when you're on 6 Don, it's like they're on 4 Don. So it's like you ramped, essentially, is how it plays almost. And, you know, you can deal with a couple 7k swings. Generally speaking, if Smoker doesn't establish a Borsalino almost immediately, you should be winning. If they do establish a Borsalino, it can be worth just basing it and then you know, pumping a bunch of dons in and clearing it. Like, yes, they're getting value because you committed dons to it, but they're not getting free value and just a 6k blocker every single turn, which can be really, really nice. The biggest thing, play around Impact Wave. As a smoker player, whenever I'm testing it, if my opponent does not play around Impact Wave, that usually loses in the game. So just make sure you've swung with your Rush Zoro, usually, or like your Rodman or whatever it is that you've got on the board as 3 cost or lower first before you do anything else. And usually smokers playing a bunch of 2Ks, so 7k is like a magic number. Lore. This one's rough. So again, you want to be searching for your consistency tools, and you want to be playing, you want to be finding Jet Pistol, basically. I would say this is slightly disadvantageous, and you want to go second just because Lore loves going second, so you want to kind of deny that to them. Do not swing 5k, swing 6 and 7k, because Lore does not have that much defense. It's either blocking, or it's like, you know, ripping really important cards out of their hand that they're usually not going to be able to lose. So, and when you combine that with the fact that Lore needs multiple turns to get going, if you just, you know, keep the pressure up on high and you keep turning your cards sideways, it can be really, really rough. Now, if the Lore player does know the matchup, they're not going to be in a rush to resolve the leader effect. Instead, they're just going to be playing bigger stated dudes, making better use of their Don, not necessarily building as wide, but building a board tall enough that when you do turn your cards sideways, they can clear them. And if they do that, then you're kind of in a rough situation. Because if they're clearing your board, if they're focusing on that, even if you set them down to 1 life or 0 life, as long as you basically don't see a 5-cost Rush Luffy, they're going to be able to stabilize, and they're going to be able to win on the crackback. However, if you have a Jet Pistol, the turn they play the 5-cost Lore, if you just Jet Pistol it immediately, that can usually swing the game. Like, a lot of the time they need that turn to stabilize, and then from there they can just generate silly advantage. But if you kill it immediately, it's a pretty rough situation. So definitely, I would say a slightly disadvantageous matchup for Zoro, but very winnable, and very spooky for Lore players. Finally, we have got Zephyr. This is probably your freest matchup in the game. You go second because that absolutely screws with their curve. They only have 4 life, so just keep going face. They're inconsistent. They have to hard draw everything. They don't have as much life, so they don't have as many turns to just take life and hope they find their stuff that way. Play around the 2k counters by swinging in 7k. Play around Impact Wave. Just turn your card sideways. And it's really kind of difficult to lose a Zephyr matchup. They need to be high rolling, basically. And if they high roll, it is what it is. But most of the time, they're not going to. A Zoro player who knows how Zephyr plays, like I've just basically told you, play around the 2k counters and just go face, should be winning this more often than not. But there we go. That is it for this in-depth guide to Zoro. I hope you guys found this video helpful. I hope you found it useful. If you did, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel for more One Piece card game competitive content. If you're seeing this on YouTube and you are interested in getting access to this kind of content early, as I said, once again, please do check out the Patreon linked in the description below. But even if you can't, that is a-okay with me. I appreciate you just watching and making a funny little subscriber number go up. So that's it for this video, and I hope to see you guys in the next one. Cheers.